I keep the sketchbook on the top shelf, wrapped in an old scarf that smells like soap and cedar. On the cover, in a younger hand, I wrote 4 words. The night the house went quiet. I open it only when the kettle sings a little too long and the air in the kitchen feels heavy, like rain that won't fall. Tonight, I open it for you. I grew up in a blue wooden house on a quiet Milwaukee street where the mail came at 4 and the neighbor's radio hummed old songs through a torn screen. On our porch there were always shoes, my father's heavy work boots turned neatly heel to wall, my mother's soft flats pointed toward the kitchen, my sister's little scuffed pair forever tilted like they were ready to run. The porch boards held summer heat and winter ice. In every season, the front door told us the weather inside. The key spoke first. When it slid in smooth and clean, we knew there would be stories with dinner. Mailbox tales from my father's route, a laugh at a dog who chased the truck, the kind of easy talk that made the lamp glow warmer. When the key scraped and stopped, when the knob hesitated then jerked, we learned to shrink the room by making ourselves smaller. My mother's eyes would lift, one look that meant soft voices, soft steps. The kettle would whistle a shade louder, as if steam could shield a family. Our house had 2 clocks. One was the round one above the stove. The other lived under our skin. It kept time by small sounds, the thud of the mailbag on the chair, the click of a belt buckle, the slow fold of a newspaper. If the pages rustled too long, we knew to carry our plates to the sink without a word. If the chair legs dragged, we knew to disappear to our room and become careful shadows. On good nights, my father ate fast and fell asleep in his chair, the television muttering baseball through rabbit ear static. My mother would tuck a blanket over him and kiss us on our hairlines like a promise made softly, so as not to wake anything. We would whisper games on the bedroom floor, lines of hopscotch drawn with a pencil nub on old paper bags, our giggles pressed into our palms. On bad nights, the house changed shape. The hallway grew longer. The light over the stairs flickered like it was afraid. I remember the smell of the kettle, bright, metal clean, cutting through the sour edge of whiskey. My mother's hands moved quickly, wiping the counter that was already clean, straightening a picture that didn't need straightening, keeping time with the clock under her skin. She could hear a storm before the clouds formed. We took our lessons where we could. I learned which floorboard near the bedroom door would squeak, and which spot on the rug would take my weight like a secret. I learned to stack dishes so the plates would not clink. I learned that hope could be folded small and hidden in a pocket like a smooth stone. My brother wore our father's walk before he fit his shoes. He practiced the tone of command on simple things. "Pass the salt," he'd say, not looking up, and the word please dried on his tongue like a leaf left in the sun. My sister still believed in magic fixes. She would line up her dolls on the window ledge and tell them stories about trains and oceans, places where front doors opened to different kinds of air. We were not poor in the way of headlines, but money had to be counted twice. My mother stretched everything: soup, patience, a single good blouse. She kept coins in a tin that once held cookies, tucked behind the flour. I pretended I didn't know where it was. She pretended I hadn't seen her slip a nickel inside with a sigh that sounded like a prayer trying to stay quiet. I remember the exact weight of my school satchel, brown and stiff at first, then softer as the months wore it kind. The strap crossed my chest like a ribbon of duty. Inside was a pencil with a square-cornered eraser and a notebook that smelled faintly of glue and paper dust. The satchel thumped my hip in a steady beat on the walk home, a companion that matched my steps. Some afternoons, the sky over Leighton Park was a perfect rinsed blue. Others, it was a lid pressing low. The weather outside mattered less than the turn of the key. On Sundays, when the city slowed, my mother scrubbed the kettle until it shone like a coin. She said the whistle sounded like a train, and sometimes I caught her watching the steam as if it wrote letters only she could read. I asked once what it spelled. She smiled without showing teeth. Practice, she said. It spells practice. So we practiced. Soft steps, quiet forks, breath held just long enough to let a danger pass. It made us skilled. It did not make us safe. Even as a child, I understood that being careful is not the same as being protected. It is only knowing how to stand still in a moving room. Years later, I can still hear that key, still feel the porch beneath my sock feet, still taste the tea that cooled too quickly on tense nights. If you had asked me then what I wanted, I might have said a different house. Now I know I wanted a map. I didn't have one yet. But I had a pencil, and soon I would have a book that could hold more than pictures. The sketchbook began as a place to hide pictures. It became a map out. I didn't hear about the prize from a letter at home. I heard it from the school office, where the air always smelled like floor polish and pencil shavings. My drawing, 3 sparrows lifting from a wire, had won top marks at the district show. There would be a little ceremony on Friday night, a ribbon, my name read out loud. The secretary pressed a blue invitation into my hand like it might fly away if she didn't hold it firmly first. I carried that invitation home under my sweater, the paper warm against my ribs. In our room, I pulled out the dress my mother and I had sewn in secret, one careful seam at a time when the house was quiet enough to hear thread whisper through cotton. It was light blue, sky after rain, she called it. We'd saved for the fabric by dropping coins into the cookie tin and pretending we didn't notice. When I tried it on, the skirt fell just below my knees, the hem straight, the stitches small and proud. For once, I could see a version of myself that didn't shrink to fit a room. I stepped into the hallway, right as the key scraped in the lock. The door opened to the colder version of my father. His eyes moved from the dress to the invitation in my hand, as if they were stains that needed scrubbing. The weather changed. Even the light from the kitchen seemed to flinch. "What is this nonsense?" he said. "It's the district show," I began. "My drawing." He took the invitation, read 3 words, then tore it twice. The pieces fell like pale leaves. I reached on instinct, as if catching them might keep the moment from breaking. He brushed by me hard enough that my shoulder hit the wall. "You don't parade yourself," he said to the air. "Not while you live under my roof." My mother's hands were already moving, picking up paper, smoothing the dress at my waist, smoothing me like a wrinkle that could be pressed away. "It's just a school thing," she said softly. She worked so hard he didn't answer. He only looked at the blue, then at my mother, and the message passed between them like a draft under a door. "Put it away." I hung the dress behind our bedroom door and watched the fabric go still. At dinner, the fork felt heavy. My brother cleared his throat. He had been practicing a new voice, the kind that sounded like decisions were already made. "Pass the salt," he said. "No, please." The words wore our father's size even if my brother didn't yet. I passed the shaker without looking up, the way you hand a match across a dry field. At school the next day, the art room was warm with the safe smell of tempera. Miss Davenport saw the shape of my mouth and didn't ask questions that would make me lie. She turned a page on the drying rack, then tapped a clean spot on the table with a fingertip-stained umber. "Sit," she said gently. "We'll paint after," I sat. The quiet in that room was different. It had windows in it. "I was going to go on Friday," I said, keeping my eyes on a jar of brushes. "It's nothing." "Things that change a life often look like nothing from far away," she said. Then she slid something from her bag, a small, hard-covered book the color of toast. The paper inside was thicker than any notebook I'd owned, with a faint tooth that promised to hold a line without letting it slip. "Paper is a patient listener," she told me. "The way a person offers you water before you realize how thirsty you are. Some truths are safer here first." I ran a finger along the inside cover. It made the softest sound. I wanted to put the whole of myself inside and shut it like a door. That evening, my father came home on the late side, steps uneven on the porch. No one mentioned Friday. My mother folded laundry into perfect stacks, a small order she could make. My brother leaned back in his chair with a swagger that didn't belong to him yet, balancing on two legs like he trusted the fall to favor him. When the chair thunked back to the floor, he smirked. "You heard, Dad," he said without looking at me. "No parading." The word stung not because of the meaning, but because of the mouth that used it. I saw in my brother the outline of a future I didn't want to draw, not just his face set in our father's angles, but the habit of deciding who someone else can be. After dishes, I went to our room and closed the door softly, the way you close a book you aren't finished with. I slipped the hard-covered notebook from my satchel and opened to the first page. The paper waited without hurrying me. I drew a small ribbon, not pinned to a dress or a stage, just floating, as if it had learned to be proud without permission. Then I drew 4 lines for a window and a little square for a latch. I didn't draw the door. Not yet. In the hallway, the kettle began to sing. My mother liked the sound. It meant heat and water, and something simple you could hold on a cold night. I kept drawing until the whistle faded. The house kept its rules. The page kept mine. I didn't go to the ceremony. Someone else's name was read out loud under the school lights, and the ribbon went home to another kitchen. But I still had my dress hidden and a book that did not belong to my father's weather. The next morning, I tucked the notebook under my mattress and felt the bed hold it like a secret. I didn't know it then, but I had just been handed more than a place to put pictures. The day my teacher handed me a hard-covered book, she handed me a future. I started spending my free periods in the art room, where the air held the soft smell of paper and wash water, and the window light fell in big, kind squares. Miss Davenport kept the room like a promise. Brushes rinsed and turned bristles up, pencils sorted by hardness, a shelf of chipped mugs for rinsing that looked like a parade of small, useful soldiers. She didn't talk much about feelings. She talked about seeing. "Look first," she'd say, tapping the page with a finger-stained raw umber. "Draw what is there. Not what you fear and not what you wish." "What is?" I drew apples, a chipped vase, a clock with a hairline crack across its face. Then, without being told, my hand began to make other shapes. A hallway with the baseboard nicked by the leg of a table years ago. The front door from memory. The lock a little darker. The knob turned halfway like a breath held. My mother's hands, clean, quick, brave, curled around a kettle handle. I told myself it was just practice. Miss Davenport noticed the way my lines tightened when I sketched doors. She set a small cage on the table one afternoon, the kind used for a classroom canary that no longer sang. "Draw it," she said, and then, as if it were nothing, "and draw what isn't there." "What isn't there?" She smiled. "Air has a shape. So does freedom. Draw the space between the bars." I did. It felt like learning a new word in a language I already spoke. My pencil moved slow, then sure, tracing not just metal, but the invisible places where a body might fit, or not. When I finished, I shaded a small bird inside. Plain. The kind you might miss if you weren't looking. I gave it one lifted foot, as if it had just discovered that air has edges and might hold. At home, money thinned between paydays. The cookie tin behind the flower grew heavier by nickels, the way a morning grows brighter by degrees you barely notice until the light is simply there. My mother sewed a patch on my sleeve so neat you had to lean in to see it. My brother tested his new voice on the house like a trumpet someone handed him without asking if he could play. "Close the door," he'd say. "Quiet down." He sounded like the future wearing our father's shoes. I made the first secret pages at night. I would wait for the hallway to go still, for the late news to turn into snow on the screen, for my mother's light step to pass our door and return to the kitchen. Then I would slide the hard-covered book from beneath the mattress and open to a clean page that smelled faintly of glue and wheat. The paper didn't hurry. It didn't shush me. It didn't ask me to explain. It only waited. On those pages, I drew a door with the threshold a fraction higher than it should be, the kind that catches a toe if you are running. I drew our kitchen table with one leg that needed a folded matchbox to stand. Except in the drawing, I added a second matchbox, and then erased it, leaving the ghost of a fix. I drew 3 cups on the counter and left a 4th as a faint outline, as if someone were there in theory but not in practice. When I finished, I pressed my palm to the paper to feel the tooth of it, like a cat testing a new patch of sun. Miss Davenport began to teach me negative space, how what you leave empty matters as much as what you fill. Shadows aren't a color, she said. They're the shape of light you can't see. I thought about that while scrubbing dishes, while listening to the quiet under voices. I started noticing the shadows in our house. The long, thin one of the stair rail at 4 p.m, the square one of the front door when it opened halfway, the soft oval my mother's hand made on the wall when she paused to breathe. One afternoon, she mentioned her cousin Beatrice again, a yellow house in a town called Cedar Creek, a garden with herbs that would live if you remembered to water them. She said it the way people mention train schedules when they have no ticket, just to make sure the idea of arriving somewhere still exists. I went to my sketchbook and drew a rectangle with a line down the middle and a dot for a latch, not our front door, a different one. I shaded the edges lightly and left the center bright. My brother started guarding the living room as if it were a post someone had assigned him. He'd sit near the door like he owned its hinges. He tried to follow me down the hallway just to see where I went. The more he watched, the quieter my hands became. I learned which page edges squeaked and which turned silent. I learned to slide the book in and out from the mattress without a breath of sound. Practice, my mother had said once when I asked what the kettle spelled. Practice. I drew a key, not with teeth and a bow, but a key made of moments. A look held a second too long. A coin shared, a bus schedule folded into a purse, a teacher's hand placing a book on a desk without making a speech. In the margin, I wrote one word so small that even I had to squint. Exit. On Sundays, the city slowed its breathing. I would sit by the window and sketch the porch shoes, the boots turned heel to wall, my mother's flats, my sister's scuffed pair, tilted like they were ready to run. Then I would close the book and hide it like a flame under a cup. I told myself the drawings were just a way to keep my mind from fraying. Lines to tie loose thoughts together. A map of feelings instead of streets. I thought the notebook would save my mind. I didn't know it might save our lives. Bills began to talk louder than the radio. The number on the gas slip climbed like a hill we had to push the whole house up. Groceries came home lighter. My mother stretched meals with broth and quiet skill. One chicken became soup, then sandwiches, then a pot that tasted mostly of memory. She took in mending for neighbors, hemming pants by the window where the light was honest and the thread could find its way. Sometimes she left before dawn with a scarf over her hair. Helping Mrs. Porter tidy, she'd say, coming back with hands that smelled faintly of lemon oil and nickels that clicked into the cookie tin. We didn't call them side jobs. We called them errands so the house wouldn't hear. The calendar months lost their edges. We measured time by due dates and the dates they passed us. My father's route hours shifted, then shortened, then came back angry. On payday, he'd slam his mailbag on the chair as if the bag owed him an apology and the chair should pay it. Everything cost more, he'd mutter. The way he said everything made it sound like we were included. At school, Miss Davenport added a charcoal stick to my hand. Broaden your range, she said. At home, my mother did the same with life. She snipped and saved and stitched our days wider than the cloth should have allowed. When the tin behind the flour got too heavy to sit right, she moved it to a sewing basket and tucked a scrap of lace over it like a nap. That was when Cousin Beatrice began visiting our kitchen in sentences. Beatty's house is small but cheerful, my mother would say while drying a cup. Yellow with white trim, herb garden out back. She sells basil by the jar. The word cheerful sounded strange in our kitchen, like a bird that had flown in by mistake. Cedar Creek isn't far, she added another night, turning the cup until it shone. Buses run regular. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. I drew a square of a house with a triangle roof and a small rectangle of a door with a dot for a latch. Then I drew a bus with windows like tiny promises. I kept the lines simple so they wouldn't scare. Walter started treating the living room like a post someone had assigned him. He took the spot by the door in a chair that squeaked when he leaned back, arms crossed the way men on corners held their afternoons. "Dad says keep an eye," he told me, words rolling in his mouth like marbles he liked the feel of. He watched my comings and goings the way people watch a pot that ought to boil faster. If I stood, he stood. If I reached for my satchel, he looked at my hands like they were suspicious. One afternoon, he walked me down the hallway just to see if I'd flinch. I didn't flinch. I learned instead. Which floorboard would betray me? Which hinge breathed? Which pocket hid a folded bus schedule without printing its shape on my skirt? Fear turned into inventory. Inventory turned into skill. We tried the door once, by which I mean the regular way. The plan, such as it was, fit in a breath. He sleeps early. We walk quiet. The tin money becomes bus money. Cedar Creek turns from sentence to place. The front steps were cold that night, the porch dark as a closed eye. My mother's hand shook when she reached for the knob, and then froze. Not because she lost her nerve, but because the key wasn't where she left it. He had taken it upstairs. The lock looked back at us the way a shut mouth looks at a secret. We went to bed without speaking. In the morning, my father acted like nothing had happened, which was worse than shouting. He hummed 2 lines of a tune he never finished and read the paper as if the news were about other people in another city. Walter whistled along, off-key, pleased with a power he hadn't earned. That day I sketched the lock. Not our lock exactly, just its idea. A circle within a circle. A line that stops where it doesn't appear to. Beside it I drew a matchbox and shaded one side a little darker, like a thought turning. In the margin I wrote one word small, study. Cousin Beatrice called on Sunday. I didn't hear the whole conversation, only my mother's side. Yes, classes are going. You're kind. No, he doesn't like visits. Then a pause long enough to taste. Buses are regular, she said softly, as if testing the sentence for cracks. When she hung up, she rubbed the receiver with her thumb like it might keep a promise if polished. Walter noticed our new carefulness and mistook it for guilt. He started opening drawers without asking, peering into the sewing basket like it was his. He wasn't looking for thread. He was looking for control. We learned to step around him, to make our tasks look like nothing. My mother began sewing in smaller motions, needle bites so tiny they were almost air. I learned to turn a page in the sketchbook without the whisper of paper, to breathe shallow when I slid it back under the mattress. The plan we didn't call a plan changed shape. It shrank to fit inside ordinary acts, a recipe card with a bus route on the back, a grocery list with Basil and Beatty written in the same careful hand, coins counted by touch in a pocket while the kettle sang. It wasn't bravery yet. It was practice. At night, when the house lay still and the television snowed its soft nonsense, I drew not a door opening but a hinge. I shaded the pin in the plate, the place where movement lives. Escape no longer looked like a sprint across a porch. It looked like patience applied to a small, stubborn piece of metal until it turned. We tried the front door once. It slammed shut, so we studied the lock. It was the kind of cold that makes windows hum. The sky had cleared to a hard, bright dark, and the street lamps threw long spears of light across the sidewalk. I was rinsing 2 cups we hadn't used, just to have something to do with my hands, when the back door opened a crack and then wider. My mother stepped in sideways, like someone hoping not to disturb a room. The scarf she wore had slipped, and I could see the edge of a swelling already rising under her eye, the color coming in fast, like a bruise had been waiting its turn. She set her purse down too carefully. People handle breakable things that way. People handle themselves that way too. I'm fine, she said before anyone asked. She wasn't. She guided the chair out with her hip and sat like a person who knew sitting would be noticed. Her breath came steady by decision. What happened? I asked, though I knew the shape of it without the words. Nothing you need to fix tonight, she said. The way she touched the table, flat palm, quiet tap, told me everything. Be ordinary. Be small. In the other room, Walter cleared his throat. He'd started doing that, announcing himself like a bell that had found a tower. Dad's in a mood, he called, too casual. Don't start anything. The authority looked borrowed on him, still creased from someone else's closet. He leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sliding over the bruise and away. You should be more careful, he said to the air, and the word you meant not him. The house pulled tighter. The key to the front door, which used to hang on a nail by the frame, was gone. The back door's latch now had a new metal hasp and a little shiny padlock my father had installed for safety, as if safety could be hammered on. Windows had been painted shut years before to keep the heat in. The phone cord had a new knot where it met the wall, the kind that kept you standing close to the base to speak. Every change had come one at a time, reasonable if you didn't add them up. I added them up now. The sum was a cage. My mother poured water into the kettle. The tap sputtered, then ran. She turned the flame low. The soft blue ring looked like a small promise in a room that had forgotten how to keep them. When she reached for a towel, her sleeve slipped back, and there, faint but new, were the crescent marks a hard grip leaves behind. She noticed my eyes and pulled the fabric down like a curtain. We'll manage, she said. Manage is a word people use when the real one is survive. The front door opened. The cold walked in first. My father set the key on the table and then picked it back up, a motion so quick you'd miss it if you weren't watching for sleight of hand. He placed it in his pocket like a coin and patted the pocket like a habit. He didn't look at my mother's face. He looked at the kettle as if it owed him boiling. He talked a while in a voice that climbed and fell with no need of answers. The words weren't important. The room learned the rhythm, ducked and rose like it had done 1,000 times. Walter echoed a laugh at the right spots, a half-second late. The soundtrack of the house went on. The news too loud, the spoon too quiet against the mug, the radiator clicking like an old dog's step. I waited for fear to find me where it always did. At the base of my throat, a small fist closing. It didn't. Something colder arrived instead. Not ice exactly. More like a winter lake that had made up its mind. I looked at the padlock on the back door and at the empty nail near the front. And a thought landed so gently, it felt like it had been sitting there all along. This is not a storm to hide from. This is a machine to turn off. Later, when the house settled and the television snowed, I took a dish towel to the bathroom mirror and wiped the fog until my mother's face appeared beside mine. She dabbed the swelling with a washcloth and didn't meet my eyes in the glass. He'll sleep soon, she said, to the mirror, to me, to the old pipes. Things are harder when the money's tight. That's not why, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I set it down carefully. He chooses. Her hand paused midair. In the mirror I saw a flicker, like a match catching, dusk to flame, then steady. She folded the washcloth and pressed it to her skin. Yes, she said, as if the word had weight she needed to feel to believe. We stepped lightly back to our room. I felt for the squeaking floorboard and missed it by memory. My sister slept turned toward the wall, knees to chest, a small stone that had learned to be a shape the river could go around. I slid the hard-covered book from under the mattress. The paper lifted my pencil the way a current lifts a leaf, just enough to carry it forward. I drew the table in the hallway, the chip on its corner, the path a falling body would take from standing to floor. I drew the hasp on the back door, the curve of the new padlock, the screws that bit too shallow because the wood there was old. I drew the key. not its teeth, its absence. I didn't shade a door opening. I sketched the place a hinge held the weight, the pin that could be coaxed up with patience and a butter knife. I drew the medicine bottle on the bathroom shelf, the thick glass that turned the label amber. I drew a matchbox. I drew a line from one to the other and didn't label it. The page knew. Something in me settled like a decision sitting down. I heard the porch creak, the last check he always made before sleep, the slow turn of the lock like a sentence period. The kettle ticked itself cool. The house exhaled. Fear had been my teacher for so long that I almost thanked it before I let it go. In its place came a quieter thing with a straighter back. I closed the sketchbook and felt the weight of it. Small, ordinary, sufficient. In the sketchbook, I finally drew a key, not to open, but to break the lock. We didn't set out to hurt him. We set out to live. There is a difference I will hold until my hands can't hold anything. If you've never measured your days in quiet, you might not see it. But survival has its own math. It counts mothers' faces and girls' futures, and asks what lets them see tomorrow with both eyes open. I opened the sketchbook to the page where I'd drawn the bathroom shelf. Thick glass bottle, amber label, the one thing he trusted to quiet the pain in his knee so he could sleep without gnashing the house in his teeth. I traced the bottle's shape once, twice, until the pencil line felt like a groove I could walk. My mother watched me draw. She had the towel folded in her lap, fingers on the edge like a person holding a ledge. When I looked up, she didn't ask what. She asked how. Slow, I said. Careful. We plan nothing aloud. Words have a way of waking walls. Instead, we move through ordinary tasks like beads on a string, each one threaded into place so the necklace looked like any other day. Afternoon. He slept on his side after the late shift. The good knee crossed over the bad, a habit of years. Walter had gone out, hungry for the kind of noise boys make when they can't hear themselves think. My mother wiped the counter twice and dried a cup that didn't need drying. She checked the hallway. I checked the back step. The radiator clicked. The house breathed. I took the small tube from my school satchel, the clear craft glue Mrs. Davis at the supply store had recommended without knowing the prayer she had answered. It dries slow, dear. Sets hard, she'd said, wrapping it in brown paper. I'd nodded like a girl with a project due, which was true in the barest way. In the bathroom, the light hummed. The mirror held our faces without judgment. My mother twisted the bottle's cap with steady fingers. I could smell the sharp menthol promise the oil made every night. She poured a measure into the sink, just enough to make room without making absence. The liquid slipped away in a slow rope. I pierced the foil of the glue with a pin and squeezed a clear bead into the mouth of the bottle. It slid down, lazy as honey. Another bead. Then another, counting heartbeats. Not seconds, because clocks lie when you're afraid. I rolled the bottle between my palms until the two substances became one story. The label hid the thickness. The smell covered the truth. My mother wiped the rim with the edge of her towel and set the cap back on with the same care she used to button a small child's coat. We put it exactly where it had lived for years, right side of the shelf, half an inch from the tile seam, label facing outward. Not caution. Ritual. If you keep every other piece the same, the one piece you change stays small enough to survive. Then we waited. There is a silence particular to houses that hold their breath. It comes in soft on felt feet and sits in the corners like a cat. We moved inside it. I swept a floor that was clean. My mother mended a hem that could have waited. We did all the nothing that keeps the world from noticing when you mean to change it. Time lengthened. The sun slid, then fell, pulling the light with it. The new padlock shone at the back door like a bad idea polished bright. Walter returned, tried on a joke, took it off. He didn't know why the air felt different. Weather without a forecast. At supper, my father grumbled about his knee the way a man complains to prove the world owes him. He ate fast, He told a story about a foreman as if we were co-workers, not witnesses. He reached for the newspaper. He didn't look at my mother's face, which was a mercy and an insult in equal parts. Later, the bathroom door closed. The cap clicked open, that small sound we had memorized. I felt the house tip toward that point like a ball rolling to the lowest place. I could smell the menthol through the door, the old promise of relief covering the new plan of resistance. My sister's hand found mine under the table and stayed. He came out and crossed the hall with his usual limp, grunting like an animal that believes its noise is law. The bottle sat where we had left it, looking like its honest self. We made tea. We didn't drink it. Steam rose and vanished. Night widened. The television turned to snow, then to a blank face. The key turned once at the front, once at the back. Bed springs answered in the room down the hall, then went quiet. The glue would need hours to learn its new hardness. Hours are a lifetime when your heart counts them. We lay in our clothes. I could name every sound. The radiator, the wind at the eaves, a distant truck that took a street too fast. The house shifted on its old bones. I didn't pray for his pain. I prayed for the hinge that held our lives. A mixture setting, a morning arriving, a line we had drawn in graphite becoming real enough to stand on. Just before dawn, the light outside turned the color of tin. The air thinned with that strange brightness night gives up right before it admits defeat. From the bedroom down the hall, it came. The sound of a man trying to move a leg that would not move. The sound snapping from complaint to shock in one breath. Then a shout. Not a word, but a noise, torn from the middle. A thud like a table corner finding what it had always been aiming for. I sat up. The kettle, empty, ticked to itself in the quiet kitchen. My mother's eyes found mine. She didn't speak. At dawn, a scream split the house, and a door opened. He made the sound of a man whose body had stopped taking orders. Then came the scrape of his heel against the floor, the slap of a palm missing purchase, the ugly thud where wood meets bone. The house waited, as if deciding which way to tilt. My mother stood first. She didn't rush. She put her hand on the door jamb like a diver testing air. We stepped into the hallway together. He was on the floor beside the little table with the chipped corner, one leg straight and useless, the other bent wrong at the hip because it had nowhere else to go. Blood threaded from a cut at his hairline, thin at first, then more. "Help me," he barked. Then softer. "Margaret, help," like the first word had slipped. He reached for her ankle. She stepped back. Not cruelly, carefully, like a person avoiding a hot pan. His hand closed on air and shook. In those seconds, the weather in the house turned. For years, the air had leaned in his direction. Now it settled level. He was still the biggest thing on the floor. But he was not the tallest thing in the room. Walter's door stayed shut. He was out or pretending sleep well enough to keep the world off him. My sister came to the threshold and stopped with her toes on the line where our room's rug ended. Her face was pale, but her chin was high. She took my hand like you hold a handle that opens a heavy door. "We have a window," my mother said, voice even. 5 minutes, maybe less. It wasn't a plan. It was a clock. He tried another tone. "You'll pay for this," he hissed, like a man who can still imagine standing. The words landed and did nothing. "Documents," I said. My mother moved before the syllables finished. In 2 long steps, she was in the closet, reaching behind the stack of folded towels for the cookie tin that didn't hold cookies. Inside, birth certificates folded into their own creases, a bus schedule softened at the edges from being read too often, 2 photographs that had learned to live without frames, a few small bills and a mesh of coins. She poured the money into her purse and slid the papers flat along the bottom. I crossed to the bed and pulled the mattress corner just far enough to free the hard-covered book. My fingers left clean prints on the cloth. I tucked it inside my sweater against my ribs where important things had been kept safe before. It felt like a true weight. In the kitchen, I took the butter knife with the thinnest spine. My mother caught my eye and nodded. "Back door," she said. Behind us, he had propped himself on his elbows. "Don't you dare!" he spat, trying to turn the straight leg, the knee refusing him like a door that had forgotten its handle. His breath came in little saws. The blood at his temple went from thread to ribbon. We didn't run. Running makes noise and mistakes. We walked like women who have folded more than laundry. At the back door, the new padlock blinked its bright lie. The hasp screws were shallow in the old wood. He'd rushed the job. He always did when he wanted control to look quick. I slid the butter knife under the hinge pin and pried. It lifted, stubborn at first, then willing. My mother held the door steady to keep the metal quiet. Clara kept looking the hall, her body small and fierce as a lit match cupped in hands. From the floor, he yelled our names as if he owned them. Margaret, Ellie. He left my sister's name for last, like a man who forgets that the smallest people hear the loudest. There was fear in the sound now, threaded through the anger, and something else that wasn't either. Surprise, maybe, that the world could continue without his permission. The top hinge pin came free. I eased it out and set it on the counter, then worked the second, counting breaths, not seconds. When it slipped up, I looked at my mother. Her eyes were clear. "Coats," she said. "Papers, shoes." Clara moved like a whisper, fetching what we had prepared and hidden for a different night. 3 small stacks of clothes, already rolled, the purse with the tin emptied into it, the spare keys to a cousin's hope. I tucked the bus schedule into the sketchbook and buttoned the sweater higher. We eased the door open from the hinge side, the latch and lock still closed. The winter air slid in around our ankles like a cat. The door lifted enough to clear the hasp, swung a hand's width, then a shoulder's width, then the space a body needs when it's done being furniture. He tried one more time. "You can't," he said, not shouting now. He sounded like a man telling the tide to mind him. "You owe—" The word died on him as if it had no air of its own. My mother stepped close enough to look down at him. No anger in her face, no apology, only a steadiness I had never seen given room before. "We owe our lives," she said, "and we are taking them." We slipped through the space we'd made. The door leaned back into its frame with a quiet, satisfied sound. On the porch, the boards were cold under our soles. The sky was still the color of tin, but the edge of it had started to pink like a thought that might warm. We went down the back steps and into the thin morning. No bags clattering, no goodbyes to betray us, just the 3 of us moving in the same direction for the first time in years. At the alley's mouth, I looked once over my shoulder and saw our kitchen window, small and square, as if the house were learning to live without watching us. My mother didn't look back. She kept her hand light on my arm and her pace steady, the way you carry a pot filled to the brim. Clara's breath came in white puffs, counting the same numbers as mine. The street widened. Somewhere a bus sighed. Somewhere water boiled for someone else's tea. The world was larger than our hallway, and did not creak when we stepped. Leaving the porch took minutes. Leaving the walls took an hour. The air felt too thin at first, then too rich. I pressed the sketchbook against my ribs and felt my heart push back, one beat, then another, alive and audible. We turned the corner. The house slid out of sight. Leaving the house was easy. Leaving the past took years. Beatrice's house was the color of butter left in sun, with white trim that made it look always awake. The front steps were shallow, the kind you could climb even carrying too much. A little bell over the door gave a polite ring when we came in, as if the house were saying it had been expecting us. Beatrice hugged my mother first, long, with her eyes closed, then folded me and Clara into the same safety, like she was tucking quilts at the end of a bed. Inside smelled like soap, oranges, and something green from the herb pots on the sill. Basil, mint, a stubborn rosemary that reached for the light. The kitchen table had paint rub marks where elbows had done years of talking. On a shelf sat jars with labels written in Beatrice's firm hand. Apricot 6 to 67, pickled beans 568, for colds. A small radio murmured news at a kind volume. No one turned it up to test anyone's nerves. We learned new rules in hours, not years. Doors shut with soft clicks, not declarations. Shoes came off because it kept the floor clean, not because anyone demanded we stand at attention. The kettle still sang, but it meant tea now, not timing. When it whistled, Beatrice laughed and said, all right, the way you answer a friendly neighbor at the fence. She showed us our room. 2 narrow beds, 1 cot, a blue quilt with tiny white flowers, a braided rug that turned the floor warm under our feet. It's little, she apologized, though she didn't need to. We'll make it do. She put a hand on my mother's cheek, in a gesture so simple it made my throat tight. You're safe here, she said. Not a promise about the whole world, just about this roof. That first night, habit climbed into bed with me. I lay on my side and listened for a door that would never open here, for a key that didn't belong to this lock, for the drag of a chair leg that lived miles away. My ears rang with the absence. The silence had edges I didn't know how to lie against. I kept my palm on the sketchbook under my pillow the way other children kept dolls, feeling the corners through the case, counting my breath until my breath counted me. Somewhere in the night, without my permission, sleep came. When I woke, morning had arrived without asking me to earn it. We built routines like scaffolding. My mother took a job at a small clothing workshop on Main, hemming skirts, sewing buttons that stayed, putting dignity back into garments tired of being worn thin. She left with a covered tin of Beatrice's rolls, and returned with the soft dust of thread on her sleeves, and that look of a person who has traded one kind of tired for a better kind. Clara started school 2 streets over. She brought home new words for games and a folded paper fortune teller that predicted only good things. I registered late at the high school and found the art room by following the familiar smell of paper and wash water, as if one room could be a compass for another. News traveled slower in Cedar Creek, but it traveled. A neighbor with a cousin in the city said my father had been taken to the hospital after a fall. Another said his knee had gone bad for good. Each report arrived like a pebble tossed in a pond. Small splash, widening rings, then quiet. My mother would pause with the needle mid-air, then set it down and fold her hands. One moment of stillness for a complicated past. All right, she'd say at last. Not unkind, not pleased, just finished. We did not send messages back. As for Walter, he thinned into rumor. Someone had seen him with a friend near the rail yard. Someone else said he'd followed work to the next county. He was a shape moving at the edge of the map, the kind you label with a simple word. Away. I tried to decide what I felt. Anger was too loud for this house. Pity was too big for a girl who was learning to breathe. I settled on distance, it fit. Beatrice's yellow house taught us other small mercies. You could leave a cup on the table and find it later right where you'd left it. If a door blew shut, it was the wind, not a warning. A laugh in one room stayed a laugh all the way to the next. We ate Sunday dinner with napkins tucked neatly and talked about weather that existed outside, not inside people. After the plates, Beatrice brought a tin from the cupboard and shook it. Coins clicked like polite rain. Bus money jar, she said. For wants, not just needs. She looked at me when she said it, so I understood she meant more than fares. At night I drew the yellow house in lines even and sure, the steam from the kettle curling like handwriting that knew its letters. I drew the herb pots and labeled them in small script. Basil, mint, rosemary. I shaded the space under the porch where a cat might sleep and not be kicked awake. On the last page, for the first time, I sketched a bed and left the pillow smooth. Safety came first. It arrived in the shape of a door you could close without checking the lock twice. But safety isn't the same as peace. Peace has its own price. Stillness that makes old noise echo. Quiet that throws past voices against new walls. Mornings where the light is kind, but your body keeps bracing anyway. We were learning which costs to pay and which to refuse. Safety isn't the same as peace. Peace has its own price. Color came back to me in small permissions. First in chalk dust on my fingers at the Cedar Creek High School art room. Then in the stubborn green of Beatrice's rosemary. Then, in a borrowed tin of watercolor pans that smelled faintly like old pennies and rain. I had spent years drawing in pencil and quiet. Now the page asked for breath in a different language. The art room here was different from Miss Davenport's. Newer tables, a sink that didn't groan, windows that faced east so the morning walked straight in. Mrs. Reed ran it with a calm that felt like a hand on your shoulder, steadying without steering. She didn't ask questions that made you choose between truth and silence. She said, "Try it," and slid a brush across the table. I tried it. Washes first, thin as memory, then braver layers. I painted the yellow siding of Beatrice's house, and let the sun live in the paper by not painting where the light was. I painted the herb pots, basil, mint, rosemary, and learned how green isn't a tube color but a conversation between blue and yellow. When I made mud, Mrs. Reed said, "Good. Now you know how to make not mud." At home, my mother came back from the clothing workshop with thread dust on her sleeves, and I came back with a sketchbook that smelled like fresh paper and a little courage. After supper, we sat at Beatrice's table and shared quiet the way some families share dessert. Sometimes I would turn the book around to show them something small, the curve of a kettle's steam, the exact way sunlight sat in the chipped glaze of a mug. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. Their faces loosened in a way that let me know the drawing had done more than depict. It had made room. In March, Mrs. Reed tacked a flyer to the corkboard, County Arts Exhibition, Student Division. My stomach did its old flip, the one it learned the night a blue dress became a problem. The room felt smaller for a second, then ordinary again. Mrs. Reed caught my eye. "Don't think about winning," she said. "Think about telling the truth so well the paper believes you." I went home and pulled out the older sketchbook, the hard-covered one with pages that knew how to keep a secret. On a fresh sheet I began a piece larger than my usual. Charcoal for bones, watercolor for breath. 3 figures stood at the edge of a shadow and stepped forward into a field of light. I didn't give them faces. I gave them posture. The first held a book against her ribs. The second's hand rested on the first's shoulder. The third looked back, not in longing but in witness. Behind them, the house wasn't a house exactly, just angles and a dark square where a door might have been. In the corner I laid a thin line of tin gray morning, and near the bottom I painted a sliver of yellow that matched Beatrice's siding. I called it What We Carry Out. I submitted it with my name written neat and small. Then I tried not to think about a stage or a ribbon or a voice reading anything out loud. The exhibition was held in a gymnasium that smelled like varnish and orange slices. Paintings leaned on easels like people waiting for a bus. I walked the rows with my hands in my coat pockets because it felt safer that way, like keeping all of me from touching too much. When I found my piece, a woman with a clipboard was already standing in front of it, reading the title slowly. She didn't turn when I stopped nearby. She just nodded once to herself, as if answering a question she hadn't asked aloud. When they called the student awards, I didn't hear my name first. I heard my mother's breath catch and Beatrice's quiet that meant yes, there it is. Then I heard it, my name, pronounced correctly and sent up into the rafters like a paper airplane that somehow kept flying. I walked to the little ribbon and shook the hand I was given to shake. My knees felt like they belonged to someone braver. I borrowed them anyway. A month later, an envelope came addressed to me. Real ink, not a stamp. The return address was a school in the city, the kind of place where art has its own building, and students carry portfolios big enough to be doors. I opened it at the kitchen table with the women who had built me. Inside was a letter and a number that looked like a bridge, a scholarship offer for summer studies that could turn into more. Mrs. Reed had sent them my work without telling me. "Sometimes people need to see you before you see yourself," she said when I called her. The kitchen tilted again, this time in a new direction. Chicago meant trains and blocks and corners that looked like corners I had learned to avoid. The city held ghosts with familiar footsteps. My mouth opened and closed around the idea. "It's dangerous," I said, hearing an old key turn in a lock that didn't exist anymore. "Dangerous is not the same as hard," Beatrice said, pouring tea. "Hard means you can practice." My mother touched the edge of the letter with the tip of one finger, as if blessing it. She didn't tell me what to do. She said, "We will make this work if you want it. If." The if was a kindness. It put the choice in my hands and the net under my feet. Fear and growth sat across from each other like two women at a table, both waiting to see who would speak first. I looked at my mother's face, where new quiet had made room for old strength. I looked at Beatrice's yellow house through the window and imagined leaving its certain warmth for a city that would ask me to keep choosing myself in louder ways. My hand went to the sketchbook by instinct. I ran my thumb along its spine. I said yes. My voice arrived before my doubt could talk me out of it. That night I painted the rosemary plant in Beatrice's window. I painted every stubborn needle, every place the light landed bright and every place it hid. When I finished, I left a small square in the corner unpainted, the color of paper, the color of possibility, and wrote a single word in pencil beside it: forward. The letter sat on the table like a door someone had opened for me from the other side. I knew better than to think doors erase what's behind them. Success forces you to look back. I wasn't ready for what looked back at me. Chicago moved like a river that never slept. The train carried me in with a sound like metal deciding, and the station let me go into air that smelled of rain and hot stone. The art school's building had tall windows and floors that creaked like old stages. Students walked with portfolios big enough to be doors, and I learned to carry one too, like a person carrying her own entrance. I mapped the city the way I once mapped a house. What blocks felt kind, which corners turned mean after dark, which alleys held only trash cans, and which held eyes. I learned the number of steps from the dorm to the studio, the cafe that sold day-old bread after 6, the bus route that got me home before the streets changed temperature. I did not visit the neighborhood where blue dresses became problems. Healing didn't mean sightseeing. In the studio, I learned new ways to tell the truth. Charcoal that spoke in big, honest shadows. Ink that punished hesitation. Oil that demanded patience, then paid you back with depth. Professors said things like negative space and value scale and gesture, and I understood that what you don't touch matters as much as what you do. At night, I washed brushes until the turpentine ran clear, and my hands smelled like a future I could keep. I built a small life with careful hands. I worked weekends shelving books in a quiet shop where the owner didn't ask about families. He asked whether I preferred the smell of new paper or old glue. I saved coins in a jar the way my mother had. Only here, the jar sat in plain sight on my desk, because no one believed my money belonged to them. I wrote letters to Cedar Creek full of light. The rosemary thriving, Mrs. Reed's postcard on my wall, a professor who said my lines held their breath in a useful way. My mother wrote back that Beatrice's cat had adopted us all, and that Clara had learned to drive. A freedom that made my chest tight and proud at once. Ghosts came without footsteps. They arrived as a smell, whiskey on a stranger's coat as he passed, making my throat close. A door slamming 3 floors down, my body bracing before my mind caught up. A voice on a bus pitched at the exact angle that used to make me smaller. I learned to name these moments without giving them a bed. That is fear remembering, I would say in my head, and then I would breathe until my lungs belonged to me again. Healing was not forgetting. It was building a room those ghosts could not rearrange. In late autumn, a letter found me. The return address was a hospital near the life I'd left. The hallway light in the dorm was the color of watered tea when I opened it. The words were simple in their hospital way. Arthur Vance, complications following a previous head injury, deceased. There was a date. There was a time. There was a line about next of kin and belongings. None claimed. I I sat on the floor with my back to my bed and let my hands go still in my lap. The first thing I felt was not joy and not grief. It was distance, a rope slackening that I had not realized was still tied around my chest. Then came sadness. Not for the man who chose harm, but for the boy he must have been before someone taught him that love was control and anger was proof. I could feel two things at once and not have either one own me. That was new. I wrote to my mother with care. "You don't have to answer this right away," I told her. "There is news. He is gone." When her reply came, it was a single sheet, her handwriting a little larger than usual. "I set down the needle and breathed," she wrote. Then I made tea. "I am not relieved exactly. I am finished. There is a difference." In the corner, she drew a tiny cup with steam rising and a small check mark beside it, as if to say, "Done." Some classmates spoke about forgiveness like a badge you pinned on your shirt to prove you were good. Professors, when they touched the subject at all, did so like critics at a distance. I learned my own language. Forgiveness, for me, was not a key I turned for someone else. It was a weight I stopped carrying so my hands could make other things. It did not require amnesia. It did not repaint the past in kinder colors. It let me hang the past on a hook by the door and walk into my own rooms unburdened. I painted a piece that winter in thin layers of blue and gray. A hallway receded, but the baseboards were clean, and the light at the end did not blind. In the foreground, a figure stood with her back to the viewer, not because she was hiding, but because she was looking ahead. On a small table, I put a hard-covered book and a bus ticket stub. The ticket was old. The book was open. In the margin, barely visible unless you leaned close, I wrote, "You may go now." When spring came, Chicago smelled of wet concrete and lilacs. I walked routes that were mine because I chose them. I took the long way home on purpose to pass a wall where morning light made the bricks glow. I learned to sleep through doors closing on other floors. Sometimes I asked myself a question as I crossed the river, watching the green water shoulder past pilings and keep going. How much do you owe a past that almost erased you? I did not know the exact sum. I only knew the payments would be on my terms now. What do you owe a past that almost erased you? Cedar Creek took me back the way a well-worn doorway takes a palm. Familiar, forgiving. The bus sighed at the curb, and I stepped down into air that smelled like cut grass and rain on dust. Beatrice's yellow house hadn't faded. It had settled, the way a person does when she knows exactly where everything goes. The little bell over the door still rang like a friendly throat clearing. Inside, the rosemary had gone woody, stubborn as ever. "You're home," Beatrice said, as if the word were a chair already pulled out for me. Work found me as if we'd planned it together. The municipal school needed an art teacher who could make order out of wonder, the principal said, smiling because he didn't know that was my favorite kind of work. I took the room with the north light and the big double sink. I lined up brushes, bristles up, pencils by hardness, mugs for rinsing in a neat parade, small soldiers ready. On the first day, I wrote on the board, "Look first. Draw what is there, not what you fear, not what you wish." Miss Davenport's words. Now mine to pass on without her name getting smaller. Children walked in with elbows and energy and stories that ran ahead of them. We learned line, then value, then how shadows are only the shape of light you can't see. I set out bowls of fruit and a rusty hinge and a chipped vase. They drew what was there and slowly what was inside. A boy who couldn't sit still learned he could hold still long enough to draw his own sneaker tying itself. A girl who apologized before every stroke stopped apologizing and started shading. On Fridays, I left the door open, and after the bell a few lingered to wash brushes and say nothing in a way that meant everything. I kept extra paper in a drawer labeled, "For the truth you can't speak yet." My mother visited the room one afternoon when school let out early for weather that never quite arrived. She ran a finger along the windowsill the way she used to test a hem, and sat in a child-sized chair with ceremony. Her hair had softened to silver. Her laugh had found its way back to the part of her face that used it most. "You made a place," she said, and the approval in her voice landed like a quilt across my shoulders. At home with Beatrice. She sewed less for money and more for pleasure, altering a church dress here, mending a collar there, singing under her breath while the machine purred. Peace had not erased the past. It had simply moved into a bigger room. Sometimes I caught her resting a hand on the kettle as if greeting an old friend. She drank her tea hot and sweet and unhurried. And when the train whistle blew in the distance, she nodded, not from longing but recognition. You can go, and you can stay. One winter evening, with snow making the street lamps look kinder, my mother came from the hall closet with a shoebox I didn't recognize. For you, she said, setting it on the kitchen table between us, the same table that had learned to hold quiet and laughter with equal grace. She waited while I lifted the lid. Inside, an envelope of old receipts, flour, thread, 2 gallons of kerosene, each with her careful marks, and a date circled as if to say, "See, the days did stack." We weren't imagining them. A bus ticket stub, brittle now, Milwaukee, Cedar Creek, the ink faded to a tea stain but the arrow still pointing forward. A photograph I'd never seen. The 3 of us on Beatrice's steps the first week, eyes tired but level, my hand at my ribs where the sketchbook hid like a heart. And at the bottom, folded twice along well-loved creases, a drawing, mine, of a door seen from the hinge side, the pin lifted a fraction, the space between frame and edge just wide enough for a life. I kept them, my mother said, not apologizing for the keeping. Proof. She touched the bus stub with one finger, then the folded drawing. Sometimes I thought maybe we dreamed the worst parts to make the better parts brighter. These remind me we did not. We walked through. I laid the folded drawing on the table and smoothed it with my palms. The graphite had softened, but the line held. Evidence, yes, but also invitation. Look closer. Remember the exact size of the opening you made. Be ready to show someone else where to push. In spring, the school held an open night. My students' work covered the walls in a bloom. Charcoal hands, watercolor windows, a series of small cages with their doors accidentally left open. My mother walked slowly beneath them, shoulders relaxed, the kind of posture you get from choosing yourself every day for many days in a row. She stopped at a still life where a child had drawn a kettle and, without saying a word, smiled at the steam. There are weights you refuse to carry, not because they are too heavy, but because they are not yours anymore. I taught that without a lecture. You can set things down. You can keep the strength. Later that summer, I took my old hard-covered sketchbook to the porch at dusk. The pages smelled like what they had always smelled like, paper and glue and breath. I turned past the hallway, past the hinge, past the yellow house, past Chicago's river. On the very last page, I had left it blank years ago, either from running out of nerve or saving it on purpose. I picked up my pencil. The last page of the sketchbook wasn't an ending. It was an invitation. My studio sits behind the house now, a square of light at the end of the path Beatrice once swept. The door sticks in summer, glides in winter. Inside, the tables are nicked from years of work, and the floor has a map of paint I never meant to spill. Jars hold brushes, bristles up, pencils by hardness, rulers with the corners rounded from being useful too long. On the wall hangs a framed print of what we carry out. The first piece I made that said the truth out loud, and then stood there while I listened back. This morning, the radio murmurs soft weather and softer jazz. My granddaughters are here. One with a crown of hair that can't be tamed and shouldn't be. The other with a careful braid that means business. They sit on stools too tall for most children and not too tall for them. I set out paper that takes a line like it means to keep it. I angle the lamp so the shadows tell the truth instead of lies. Draw what is there, I say, because some sentences worth keeping don't age. Not what you fear, not what you wish. What is, they begin. One draws the rosemary plant on the sill, stubborn, evergreen, a survivor disguised as seasoning. The other draws the bell over the studio door, the tiny clapper caught mid-swing as if a sound can be a picture. We talk about edges that aren't lines at all, only places where one color meets another and agrees to stop. We talk about negative space, and how what you don't touch matters more than most people think. We talk about erasers being tools, not shame. On the back table sits a shoebox, not the old one, another one, labeled in my neat hand, receipts of a good life. Inside, ticket stubs to school plays where the paint on the backdrops flaked like confetti. Notes from students who claimed they hated art until their hands told on them. A grocery slip for 3 lemons and too much basil. A postcard from Mrs. Reed with a sketch of Lake Michigan on a morning that looks like mine. My daughter, Daniel's wife, steps in with tea and smiles the smile that took me years to believe I could keep. "You're making them dangerous," she jokes, nodding at the girls' pencils. "Good," I say. "Dangerous to the right things." There is a moment in every lesson when the room steadies, when the air gets that particular quiet that means minds have put both hands on something true. It comes now. I watch my granddaughters' faces soften into focus, their breath even. They do not listen for footsteps between strokes. They listen for their own lines. That was the point all along. Later, when the drawings dry and the radio turns to afternoon, they ask the question children ask when they love a story. "Tell us the hallway again." I take the old hard-covered sketchbook down from its high shelf. It is wrapped in the same scarf, cedar and soap now faded to memory. I open to the page that says, "The night the house went quiet," and let them see the door drawn from the hinge side, the pin coming up like a sunrise. They know the story by heart. That is not why we tell it. We tell it so the ending keeps ending. "Were you scared?" the smaller one asks, because bravery looks like a statue from far away and like a tremor up close. "Yes," I say, and steady. I do not cut the story to make it easier to hold. I show them how fear can be a measuring tool, not a master. I show them the page where the key is only the word exit, small as a seed beside a drawing of a lock. I show them the yellow house and the rosemary, which they just drew without knowing they were adding a chapter. We put the book away. The day opens its palm wider. My granddaughters run the path to the kitchen where their father is making too many sandwiches, and their mother is laughing, and the bell over the door rings them out like a blessing. I sit for a moment with the quiet that remains and the life it holds. People still write to me about that night. Some call it revenge. They're not wrong from a distance. Glue in a bottle, a fall, a door opened on the hinge side. But distance is a poor witness. Up close, it was 3 women choosing breath over silence, tomorrow over the kind of obedience that kills by inches. If survival looks like revenge from the outside, are you still wrong to choose it? Tell me below. Your answers teach someone you will never meet. I clean the brushes. I line them up to dry like soldiers off duty. The studio door gives a little cough as I close it, and the bell finishes its small sentence. Before I leave, I add a new page to a new book. On it I draw a door that isn't ours, a latch I haven't touched yet, and a rectangle of light falling across a floor I've never walked. Some other grandmother will open that door in some other house. The key will not look like mine. Good. Keys should be specific. We will meet her next time. In her kitchen, or her corridor, or the space between 2 breaths, where a decision learns its name. For now, look at these girls with their pencils and their laughs. The cycle is not just broken, it is replaced. With language, with rooms that refuse to echo the wrong things, with hands that draw what is, and then dare to draw what could be. If this story found you where the air is thin, keep the page. Keep the breath, and if you haven't yet, stay with us. Next story, another grandmother, another closed door, and a different key. Subscribe so you don't miss where she pushes, and how the light comes in.